Hello and welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star's crime podcast with me, Michael O'Toole and Paul Healy. Today we'll again be talking to Paul about his remarkable interview with dissident Republican Shane Rowan. Mr. Rowan was jailed in 2016 when he was caught by Garda Special Branch detectives in Slane in County Meath. He was transporting 3 Kalashnikov-style rifles used by the Hutch gang in the attack on the Regency Airport Hotel in February of that year, in which David Byrne was shot dead. As you will all be aware by now, Jerry the Monk Hutch is awaiting the verdict in his special criminal court trial over that killing. He denies murder. 2 men, Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy, were on trial with Mr. Hutch, and they denied facilitating the murder of Mr. Byrne by providing the gang with cars. Neither was charged with murder. All 3 are set to learn their fate by April 17th at the latest. So without further ado, let's talk to Paul about what's left of his bombshell interview with Shane Rowan. Hello, Paul.
How's it going?
Now, just to explain to listeners, we're recording this the night before the story appears in the Star on Wednesday, so it's Tuesday evening. Now, I've been busy. I was doing a story about a celebrity who appeared in court on child defilement charges, so I've been up to my tonsils with that, so I haven't been able to talk to Paul about what story is going to appear in the paper by the time you guys are listening to this. So I'm on a journey with all you listeners, so I don't know what the second instalment of the fantastic interview with Shane Rowan is. So Paul, we're all ears.
I've spent much of today just putting together the latter half of our interview with Shane Rowan. As I said yesterday, I spoke to him for 2.5 hours. Much of it is news to my ears and probably to everybody else's ears. And so it's just about trying to contextualize and put all that together in a story. And I'll be straight up with our listeners. There are some things that Mr. Rowan has said that we just can't print. A, because we weren't there and we can't necessarily prove or take his word for it, and B, because they concern allegations about people that they might dispute and might say are not true. So I'm trying to print and put out as much as feasibly possible, and for people to then, as I said, you have to just decipher, use your own brain as to whether you believe Mr. Rowan's account. Obviously, he's someone that was centrally involved, we know that. And so, what he has to say has to be taken seriously. But also, I would just say to people, use your own brain and decipher for yourself what you would like to believe about what he says.
And we got a really good reaction to the first pod about your interview with Mr. Rowan. And the top line of that essentially was that he says that he was offered the 3 Kalashnikovs that were used in the Regency Hotel attack in which David Byrne was shot dead for 10 grand each, so 30 grand effectively.
Now, on the foot of your question, actually, you've just made me remember this. On the foot of your question about, where did they get the guns from originally? I went back and actually asked Mr. Rowan. This isn't going to feature in my article, but I'll say it here. I asked him, did you ever get any indication as to where the Hutch gang got these weapons from in the beginning? Because we kind of made the assumption, as you pointed out yesterday, Mick, that, perhaps they were giving the weapons back, having gotten them previously. And Shane Rowan just simply said he doesn't know anything about that. He doesn't know where they got the weapons from. And you might recall as well on the audio between Dowdall and Hutch that they talked about giving them as a present. So yeah. I asked Rowan today, basically, you said you bought them for 30 grand or you were buying them for 30 grand. Well, if they're being given as a present, then there shouldn't have had to have been any monetary exchange. But he claims he doesn't know what they're talking about on those tapes. I'd say it was just a thank you for seeing if we could help with peace talks. A nice surprise, shall we say, for helping out. That's what he says. But read into that what you will. I don't know, but that's his explanation.
So a couple of my journalist friends were laughing at me in yesterday's podcast when I spoke about the joy of a journalist getting 2 days out of an interview. So we're going to get 2 days, because people just understand it's it is manna from heaven when you get 2 days out of something. So we're getting 2 days on the paper and we're getting 2 days in the pod. So let's go through the second bit of Shane Rowan.
We might even get 3.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, look, I split this into 2 because people may recall during the trial that all of the detail came up about Jonathan Dowdall and Jerry Hutch travelling to Donegal on the 20th of February, where they met with Shane Rowan at his house. And then there was a subsequent meeting on the 7th of March in Strabane, where Hutch and Dowdall met with Republicans. Dowdall claimed that this was about getting peace in the Kinahan-Hutch feud, and up until now we've had to take his word for that, more or less. We hear on the tapes they certainly do talk about peace. They also, Dowdall is talking about things that indicate perhaps bomb making, and discussions about people having to go, and that certain people might have to go. So there were indications, at least from Dowdall, of potential violence, and there are sentences from Mr. Hutch there as well that people can look into in relation to that. But Shane Rowan told me that, look, Jerry Hutch essentially was looking for peace, and that's all he was looking for, he claimed, when he was coming up to these meetings with Republicans that Mr. Rowan was part of facilitating. And he claims that Jerry Hutch at this point in time was desperate and feared for his family's safety. He feared that his family was going to be killed. And that is what Jerry Hutch told Rowan and others, that he was worried for his family's safety. He said, "My family are being threatened. Is there anything that you can do?" So now you're hearing an account from another individual who was involved in these meetings, who is saying that Jerry Hutch was looking allegedly for peace, and for these individuals to get involved in brokering some sort of peace deal or peace talk with the Kinahan cartel.
So just to remind me and listeners, I suppose, this was it the 20th of February that this meeting took place, was it?
The 20th of February and the 7th of March. So the 20th of February...
Okay.
The 20th of February is when the surveillance photographs were taken of them at Rowan's house. And then the 7th of March is when they were being recorded in the Jeep going up to have this meeting. And then that was 2 days before the rifles were seized from Shane Rowan.
So there's a bit of a context. Obviously, the Regency was on the 5th of February. David Byrne was shot dead then. On the 8th of February, we know that Eddie Hutch, Neddy, Jared Hutch's brother, was murdered by the Kinahan cartel. So he's right. But we also know that there were numerous attempts, after the Regency, there were numerous attempts on other members of the extended Hutch family. You and I we could enumerate them all, but we do know that I think it was in May, so a few months after March. Well, that was 2017 that Gareth Hutch was shot dead, wasn't it? Was it 2017 or I think it was 2016. So it was a few months after Mr. Hutch talking about he feared for his family. So his nephew Gareth Hutch was murdered, and we know that there were, as I say, countless attempts by the Kinahans to kill people like Patsy Hutch and others. So he's right. He did every reason to be worried for his family's safety.
Yeah, without a doubt. As I say, there were suggestions during the trial from the defence, at least when it came to Jonathan Dowdall. He was challenged on was this really about peace from his end anyway, where he was the one talking violence allegedly, and Hutch was the one talking peace. At least if you were to believe the word of Shane Rowan, Hutch was talking peace. I'm sorry, Paul, I'm just going to interject for a wee second, if I may, because look, obviously you've done most of the trial, but I was there and you heard the tapes at a later date when they were played under cross-examination. But I heard the tapes of Mr. Hutch talking, and it was clear, and I've said this before, and I'd like your view on this. It's clear to me that Mr. Hutch sounds extremely regretful about everything that's happened in those tapes. And, say, for example, I remember Jonathan Dowdall was talking about there were people in the South Inner City who were calling themselves Team Hutch and all that sort of stuff. And that, I'm not going to say it annoyed Mr. Hutch, but he clearly wasn't rejoicing, and he wasn't, being happy about this. And I got the sense that he was deeply unhappy about everything that happened, whether he's charged or whatever. He was deeply unhappy about everything that had gone on. And I think he was sad and regretful about things. So, I think there is evidence to back that up. Yeah, and I mean, I can recall him saying, talking about trying to have some sort of a peace deal, and that it would be it would be up to certain individuals to accept that deal. I can recall him saying that on the tape.
Now, on the other side, he did talk about Heckler and Koch MP machine guns being deadly yokes, but that's fine. You know, people can talk about guns. I talk about firearms a lot. There's no problem. But he was, to my view, he was sad and regretful about the whole thing.
Yeah. Just
would you agree?
I certainly got that impression, yeah, from listening to the tapes. Just a couple of other things that Rowan said to me, because I challenged him on, well, like, did you really think that you were going to get the Kinahans to the table? Did you think you were going to broker some sort of a deal? Did you actually have the capacity to do that? And he said, look, I know it sounds strange, but it's not necessarily bringing people to the table. But he said people will always be curious to have that conversation. And he said that at that point in time, it was doable because it was, quote unquote, bad for business. And so he felt that something could have been done. But he said it all went tits up when he was arrested on the 9th and caught with the weapons. There were no further talks after that. And he described the meeting on the 7th with these other Republican figures that Hutch met with in a laneway. As being a quote-unquote introductory meeting. So it was only the first of these meetings, and it was the last, evidently, because, as he said, things went completely sideways when he was caught with the AKs.
No, as I say, I'm coming into this blind. One thing that has come to me that interests me, did Mr. Rowan say which IRA he was with? Obviously, it wasn't the provision IRA, but as we explained before, when you're charged before the Special Criminal Court, the charge is being a member of O'Glean Heron's self-styled IRA, okay? Did Mr. Rowan go into, was it the real IRA, the continuity IRA, the new IRA, O'Glean Heron? He didn't.
No, he said he was a member of a unit of it, I suppose, and effectively a splinter group, but there are elements of our conversation which we agreed not to speak about on the record, so that's all I can really say about that. Okay. But yeah, when it comes to these individuals they met in a laneway, you can recall listening on the tapes to the two men actually talking about this meeting in the laneway after they've had it. So that corroborates that there was a meeting in a laneway. Now, it's interesting because he gave an insight, Rowan, into his feelings on Jonathan Dowdall, and he said that Jonathan Dowdall was a distraction and somebody that he didn't really like all that much, and so he felt that he needed to go off and bring Dowdall to the shops while Hutch had a conversation with some of these individuals. At least for a portion of the meeting, Dowdall was brought to the shops to get a pack of cigarettes, and he left Hutch to have his chat. And he really doesn't seem to trust or like Jonathan Dowdall in hindsight, because he says that he was someone that was constantly flashing his wealth, and he came up in a Land Cruiser. He told me that he warned Dowdall not to be coming up to his house in Donegal with this flashy Jeep, as he called it, a 161D reg. He was worried that they were being tracked, that they were being followed, and he had concerns about vehicles that were in the area that he thought might be Gardaí. Now, his concerns were, as it turns out, on the money, because there were Gardaí there surveilling them, and he basically said that he had warned him, don't come back up here in that Jeep again. But when he came up with the monk that day on the 20th of February, they came in the Jeep, and he told me, I thought, for fuck's sake, here he is in the Jeep again. He said that Dowdall was wearing rings and flashing himself in big puffy jackets, and he stood out like a sore thumb, and he was concerned that this guy didn't really know what he was at. And I said, well, how did you get involved with Jonathan Dowdall? And he says that Dowdall was effectively put in contact with him, and he described him as a buffer. He was the buffer between him and, I suppose, the Hutch gang. And he says the only person that he ever dealt with throughout this whole process, his point of contact in all of this, so from the moment that we start talking about paying for weapons and that, right up to what we're talking about now, his point of contact was Jonathan Dowdall. I said, well, how do you trust Jonathan Dowdall? He says Dowdall was naming names of people, and he was ex-Sinn Féin, and he appeared to have contacts. So, and he was put into contact with him as being the person to deal with. So he went along with him, he said. But it became clear to him in dealing with him that he appeared to be incompetent, he was ignorant, and he wasn't listening to him about coming up in the Jeep and flashing his wealth.
What strikes me as really interesting there was that from what you're saying, Shane Rowan had his radar out. In other words, he was worried about police guard activity and security services and intelligence. Whereas it was clear that Dowdall and Hutch weren't, because of the way they were talking on the way up the road from Dublin all the way up. So I wonder, would Rowan have had some anti-surveillance training as part of his membership of one of the IRAs? Because that's one of the things that would be done about, who's looking out for you. Whereas it strikes me that, Dowdall bumbled amateurishly into this whole thing, and there was no sense of, are we being followed? Are they ready? Do we take any routes to go off the road? Do we do any basic anti-surveillance measures?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly Dowdall didn't think anything about being surveilled. I mean, just based off what you can hear him saying on the tapes. But it's a good way to introduce this quote from Shane Rowan. He said, "We're paranoid, right? That's how these things work. When things come to stand out, when things stand out and bring too much attention, they're paranoid about that." And he actually said, or he claims he said to Jonathan Dowdall that it was possible that the Land Cruiser was bugged, because they had suspicions that Gardaí were there in the area at the time. And he thought the only way that that's possible is if the guards are following or tracking that Jeep. And the quote is, "I actually said to him in my house, that car is fucking bugged." And he said, lucky guess, because it really was. Maybe not that day, it wasn't on that day on the 20th, but on the 7th of March, it was indeed bugged.
Did he say what Dowdall's response was to that?
He actually didn't, but clearly Dowdall didn't have concerns, because I think he told him that in February, and then by March he was still coming up in the Jeep, and we know based off what he was saying on those tapes that he certainly didn't think he was being recorded. So
Rowan and his associates clearly had tradecraft. Dowdall had none.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I thought it was fascinating that Shane Rowan appears to have no time for Jonathan Dowdall, and if we do a third story on this, there's just so much in it. But I'll allude to it here, because I don't know if we'll do another podcast. 3 might be excessive, but Rowan told me a bit about his time in prison, and he had dealings with Jonathan Dowdall, and the two of them actually came to blows at one point. And he got what's called a P19 for effectively assaulting Jonathan Dowdall in the prison during a bit of a bust-up, a bit of a row. So the two of them definitely, post February 2016 anyway, they were not getting along.
Was that Portlaoise? I presume Rowan was in Portlaoise prison, was he? He
was in Portlaoise, but then also in Wheatfield.
Right. Okay, so they had a bit of a schmozzle. Was it in Wheatfield? Do we know where?
I need to go back and look at my notes, but my recollection is it was Wheatfield. Yeah, my recollection.
Right. Okay.
But I'll come back to that. If we do get to write more of that, I'll come back to it. A couple of other interesting things. You may recall in the trial that Dowdall was asked about the surveillance photographs of him with this hold-all bag going into Shane Rowan's house. And the context of this was that Dowdall was being... It was Mr. Grehan, who was defending Jerry Hutch, was saying that on these tapes, Dowdall was saying a lot of things about making circuits and alluding to bomb making. And then he's going into this convicted IRA man's house with a hold-all bag, and he was asserting that perhaps he was showing off his circuit bomb making skills, and that's what this bag might have been about. And Mr. Grehan said, like a kind of an offhand remark of, well, what do you want us to think you were doing? Like, we are fixing a plug. And Dowdall seemed to kind of seize upon that and said, yes, that's exactly what I was doing. I was fixing a plug for a TV, for Shane Rowan's TV. So naturally I had to ask Shane Rowan about this. And I was surprised to learn that Mr. Rowan claims the exact same thing. And he says that Dowdall really was there to fix a TV plug. He said that if you go back, and we weren't privy to Mr. Rowan's trial, but he says in evidence in his own trial that Gardaí were not initially sure that he was living at that address in Donegal, and that was because there was no TV in the house. And he says, I can tell you the reason why there was no TV in the house, because the plug and the plug socket that goes into the wall was fire damaged because the fucking TV did it, he said. He said, so him, Dowdall, being a sparky, and he said, I know you might think he was coming up to have a chat about whatever, but yeah, he actually did come up to fix the fucking thing, he said.
It's just amazing how, mundane things happen at the same time as extraordinary things. They're up there and they're discussing the biggest feud that Ireland has ever seen, and it's like, I've got a problem with the TV there, big lad.
Well, I know it makes everybody laugh, but it's entirely feasible that maybe that, during the course of them talking about other matters, Mr. Dowdall was fixing the plug. Who knows? It's likely irrelevant. It's just an amusing footnote, I suppose, in the whole ordeal. But it was worth asking him about that. So we got a fascinating insight into these meetings. It will never be a fly on the wall. We'll never really know the full extent of what was said in this, and Mr. Rowan wasn't privy to all of it either. He admits that. I mean, he says him and his members of his unit were around the perimeter of one of these meetings, effectively as a security element. So he wasn't present for all of the meeting that Jerry Hutch had with these men. And then when it comes to his dealings with Jonathan Dowdall, well, in hindsight, he seems to regret getting involved with him and didn't really see him as the character he was portraying himself to be. So we got another insight, I suppose, another viewpoint into these secretive meetings.
I'm going to suspect I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. Did he say how many people were in his unit?
No. He said, but he described it as small, a small unit. Yeah, so I don't know whether you're talking 2 or 3 people or more. I don't know. But what you would know better than I suppose, what the average.
Well, I mean, we spoke about this yesterday. The unit as an active service unit. I think with the professionals, they were a completely different kettle of fish. Let's be honest. I think it was around between 4 and 6. It could be smaller. A dissident Republican unit could be 2 or 3. You're quite right. Who knows? It's just interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, kudos to Mr. Rowan. No matter what viewpoint you might take about him, he's a convicted criminal. We did get an insight into his world view and what he would like us to know about what happened here. And it was fascinating to listen to him, and it was fascinating to write it. And that's why we spent 2 days talking about it.
It was really interesting, and I must say I enjoyed hearing the story and the whole inner workings, firstly of the interview and then his story, and it's remarkable. You've got something else, have you?
Yeah, sorry. I just recalling now that he gave his viewpoint on Jerry Hutch. Now, look, just people might wonder why we're doing this in the middle of a trial. The trial is over. The judges are deliberating. We can't impact upon their decision. There will be a verdict in April, but at least where Mr. Rowan is concerned, his belief is that the monk, as I said, was looking for peace, and he thinks that the monk came into what he said mop up after the fact for other people, and from his brief dealings with Jerry Hutch, he felt that Jerry Hutch was coming in to clean up after the actions of others, and that is what he felt was his involvement. He did put the caveat in that he wasn't in the Regency Hotel and he doesn't know what happened. But based off what was said and heard by him, his viewpoint is that the monk came in to what he said mop up after the fact, and to try and end the feud. So make of that what you will. That's his viewpoint.
And a couple of things. He didn't give evidence to that effect. He didn't give evidence in the case. Okay.
No.
And will you say it or shall I? It's up to the judges. We can say what we want, but
it is.
But there is, just to explain this, we can contextualize and analyze and talk about this because it's a non-jury trial, and it's the Special Criminal Court, and there are 3 judges led by Miss Justice Tara Burns, but there are 2 senior judges within the Special Criminal Court, Miss Justice Tara Burns and Mr. Justice Tony Hunt. And I know that Mr. Justice Tony Hunt said a few months ago, we cannot be prejudiced. So that's why we have this freedom. Normally, in any court case, the shutters come down because it's a judge and jury. I mean, we can talk about this briefly. I've done a story about a celebrity. It's in today's paper, but there are restrictions in that, and we have to be very, very careful what we say. But we have more freedom in relation to this case.
That's quite different to special, yeah. You can't even allude to who that person is, even if you knew who it was. You can't identify that person, and that they're
no. And there's and there's a reason for that. Is that there's actually a law saying you can't name the person, so it's illegal. So we value our liberty.
Yeah.
So we won't be naming anybody. But that's just to explain. People think that there's a one size fits all thing with the Irish legal system, and there's not. So that's why we have this and we can't in other cases.
Yeah, and I just want to stress that I've had a couple of people asking me my opinion on things, or as a result of the fact that we've covered this trial and we've spoken to, so recently we spoke to Michael Barr's sister, and we've now spoken to Shane Rowan. People might think, oh, we are only giving a viewpoint of one side. Listen, we're journalists. We cover all sides. We speak to all manner of people. Just because we've spoken to Shane Rowan doesn't mean we agree with one word that he said or that we're taking his side or anything like that. I never expressed my opinion here, neither do you. It's not our opinion. Our opinion is irrelevant. So I just want to stress that again, because people might think, oh, we're taking sides or something. We never do, and we never will.
And we hit on this yesterday, but we might just expand on this for a moment. Look, this trial is about Jerry Hutch. The Detective Superintendent Dave Gallagher from Doc B gave evidence about very strong evidence about the existence of the Hutch organised crime gang. So we have to talk about this. But this pod is will be here when the Hutch trial is finished. And so Paul and I are very keen,
hopefully,
to talk about more crime gangs, particularly, as I said yesterday, the biggest crime gang in Ireland is the Kinahan organised crime gang. And they're going to be featuring large in this podcast for months and probably years to come.
Years? That's optimistic, isn't it, Janie? We're going to be still talking on years to come.
Sure, it's good crack. Right, is that us for today?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks very much.